others saving the flag as triple-digit heat fuels the flames. Protecting the vote, the growing firestorm over the election tonight, as the U.S. Postal Service alerts more than 20 states mail-in ballots may not be delivered in time, including to some key battleground states. President Trump accused by his predecessor of trying to kneecap the Postal Service, even as he and the First Lady request their own mail-in ballots in Florida. Coronavirus crisis, the grim forecast of 200,000 deaths in the U.S. by Labor Day, and the update from the CDC about survivors of COVID-19 and how long they may be immune after beating it. New body camera video in the George Floyd case, reportedly showing police efforts to hold onlookers back as they plead with officers to get off Floyd's neck. Disturbing tragedy. The 5-year-old boy shot at point-blank range in front of his siblings while playing outside his home. The suspect, a neighbor, now in jail as police search for a motive. Our interview with the boy's father.
I had to scoop my son up and hold him in my arms as blood ran down my arm. And all I could do was pray to God.
And summer blockbuster, why the biggest movie of the season may surprise you. Good evening. I'm Ariel Reshef in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks for streaming with us. Over the next 2 weeks, both presidential tickets will officially accept their party's nominations to be on the ballot for the White House in November. But how Americans will cast their votes is facing more scrutiny. The U.S. Postal Service is now warning at least 23 states and Washington, D.C. that they can't guarantee all mail-in ballots will be delivered to voters in time for their votes to be counted. It comes as President Trump is threatening to withhold post office funding that would be used to handle a huge spike in mail-in voting expected during the pandemic. ABC's Rachel Scott leads us off with the latest over the battle for the ballot.
Tonight, the U.S. Postal Service warning at least 23 states that mail-in ballots might not be delivered on time and risk not getting counted, calling deadlines in battleground states like Pennsylvania and Michigan incongruous and incompatible with their delivery standards. Voters in those swing states can request absentee ballots just a few days out from Election Day. President Trump carried both by less than 1% in 2016. But the turnaround too tight, says the post office, already bracing for a surge in mail-in ballots during the pandemic. Today, New Jersey announcing they'll send mail-in ballots to all of its 6.2 million residents.
Today, we are announcing that the November 3rd general election will be held overwhelmingly through vote by mail. Every vote should be safe, every vote should be secure, and every vote should count. That shouldn't be controversial.
The president launching a campaign against mail-in voting, pushing baseless claims about voter fraud.
This election will be the most rigged election in history if that happens.
Threatening to withhold funding from the post office.
Now, if we don't make a deal, that means they don't get the money. That means they can't have universal mail-in voting. They just can't have it.
Today, he doubled down on that threat, tying it to his coronavirus relief package.
Would you be willing to accept the $25 billion for the Postal Service, including the $3.5 billion to
sure, if they give us what we want. And it's not what I want, it's what the American people want.
Former President Barack Obama accusing the Trump administration of being more concerned with suppressing the vote than suppressing a virus.
What we've never seen before is a president say, I'm going to try to actively kneecap the Postal Service to encourage voting, and I will be explicit about the reason I'm doing it.
Today, the president's rival Joe Biden tweeting, voting by mail is safe and secure. Take it from the president, who just requested his mail-in ballot for the Florida primary on Tuesday.
And Rachel Scott is in New Jersey traveling with the president. She joins us now. Rachel, the newly appointed Postmaster General, a Trump ally, has made some controversial changes recently. Why is he drawing such scrutiny right now?
Yeah, Ariel, he's really under fire for putting in place some cost-cutting measures that critics say is only going to slow down or delay mail delivery ahead of what is expected to be a very busy mail-in voting season. And tonight, the U.S. Postal Service confirming to ABC News that the Inspector General is looking into those changes. Ariel.
And Rachel, some news with the president's family, with his brother Robert apparently hospitalized. What's the president saying about that tonight?
Yeah, the president did visit his younger brother Robert in the hospital, and we don't know too many details right now, but the president did say today that he is having a very hard time and stressed how close of a relationship that they have had. Ariel.
Rachel Scott there in New Jersey, thank you so much for joining us. And the race for the White House is heading into a new phase. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were together again today, each of them signing documents to officially receive the Democratic nomination at their convention, an all-virtual affair now just 3 days away. Here's ABC's Kira Phillips.
Tonight, socially distanced and signing the documents, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are officially on the ballot as the Democratic ticket.
That's it.
Since the day she was picked, President Trump relentlessly hammering Harris with personal attacks.
She was very, very nasty. She was extraordinarily nasty to Kavanaugh. She was the meanest, the most horrible, most disrespectful.
And just 24 hours ago, saying this about the first black woman on a major party presidential ticket.
Now you have a sort of a mad woman, I call her, because she was so angry and such hatred with Justice Kavanaugh.
Today, I asked the president directly.
Do you have an issue with a strong woman of color being in this presidential race? Do you
None
see,
whatsoever.
You don't see her as a threat?
As you know, none whatsoever. No, not at all.
Harris saying Biden deserves credit for picking a black woman.
Joe Biden had the audacity to choose a black woman to be his running mate. How incredible is that?
Democrats now focusing on pulling off an entirely virtual convention. Monday, speeches from Bernie Sanders and Michelle Obama. Top Democrats on display all week, including the Clintons and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, though her speech only 1 minute long. Wednesday, Harris will address the nation. So will former President Barack Obama. And Thursday, Biden makes his case to the American people.
And Kira Phillips joins me now. Kira, as the Democrats gear up for their convention next week, we're learning a little bit more about what Republicans are planning.
That's right, Ariel. You know, Trump is planning on delivering his nomination acceptance speech August 27th from the White House grounds on the final night. Meanwhile, campaign sources also telling us tonight that he will be incorporated in each of the 4 convention days, including one day, apparently, to honor doctors, nurses, and other workers on the coronavirus front lines. Also, the First Lady, we are told, will deliver her speech on August 25th, and Vice President Mike Pence will make his on August 26th from Fort McHenry National Monument in Baltimore. A lot of dates to remember there. Also, speakers during the week will include Senators Tim Scott, Joni Ernst, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California, and Nikki Haley, a former South Carolina governor and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So a lot of plans on both fronts, Ariel.
Much more to come. Kira Phillips in Washington for us tonight. Thank you.
You bet.
And now to the coronavirus pandemic. The goalposts keep moving in terms of just how bad this will get. The CDC now forecasting 200,000 lives lost, potentially by Labor Day, as districts and now universities are across the country now struggling with how to reopen safely. Matt Gutman has more.
Tonight, the CDC with that staggering projection. By Labor Day, 200,000 Americans could be lost to the virus.
We're starting to see the inkling of the upticks in the percent of the tests that are positive, which we know now from sad past experience that that's a predictor that you're going to have more surges.
And in many places, testing still facing challenges. Tressie Seymour waiting 10 hours in Rhode Island.
Now it's going on almost 7 hours that I've been in my car waiting to get tested for a rapid test.
California now tops 600,000 cases, the most in the nation. And this oppressive heat wave is forcing dozens of testing centers across the state like this one to limit their hours or close entirely this weekend. In Texas, deaths near 10,000. The Bautista family losing both parents and 2 sisters within weeks of each other.
Every morning you wake up thinking you're going to get another phone call. It's not a virus you play with.
The CDC now telling people who have fully recovered from the virus they don't need to quarantine or get tested for 3 months as long as they don't have symptoms. In Georgia, 1,600 staff and students quarantined after positive tests in schools. Protesters demanding more safeguards after images of crowded hallways surfaced.
I know my friends and I will be wearing masks, but I don't know about the 10,000 other kids at my school.
The White House task force now urging the state to do what the governor has resisted doing, issue a mask mandate and shut down nightclubs, bars, and gyms in high-risk areas. They're warning the virus is widespread and expanding. But the governor today pointing to improving numbers in Georgia. Last month, as hospitalizations and deaths were rising, the president told our affiliate WSB that Georgia has done it all right.
For Georgia, it's been great because, you've kept it down and you've reopened and you're just, you're getting close to having 100% open and you've really kept the virus to level down, which is an incredible tribute.
Dr. Anthony Fauci saying just yesterday, Americans have a choice to make.
You want to open the bars or you want to open the schools?
Tara Sinclair, a single mother in L.A., is desperate to get her first grader back into in-person schooling, not like this. If you had your choice, would you send her to school right now?
No. As much as I would love her to be in school, I think just seeing what happened in Atlanta once they sent the kids to school, it's not worth it.
And tonight, this moment of triumph here in L.A. Beatrice Marquez finally leaving the hospital after battling the virus for months.
Blessed that I'm going home after 80 days.
And Matt Gutman joins us now. And Matt, you mentioned in your report that alarming number, 600,000 confirmed cases in California. But as Governor Gavin Newsom said today, new cases have plummeted. What are some of the more hopeful signs you're seeing on the West Coast?
Ariel, it's not just new cases, it's also hospitalizations. The death rate is starting to stable out. In general, all the indications and all the statistics are headed in the right direction. The question is, how quickly will that happen? Right now, most of the schools in the state are going to remain closed, at least for the foreseeable future. A lot of parents with whom I've been speaking say they don't really expect in-person classes until the next semester after the new year, but maybe if they pass a certain threshold, schools can start opening up again. I know a lot of parents would be very grateful for that. But in general, California, because of the mandatory mask wearing, the massive closures in place for months and months now, seems to have really recovered from a pretty bad July.
Some good news there. Matt Gutman, thank you so much. By now, you've probably seen that infamous and incredibly disturbing video of bystanders watching the death of George Floyd as he pleaded, "I can't breathe." But now, for the first time, we are seeing the view from one of the officers capturing those bystanders and their growing agitation as Floyd called for help. Alex Perez has more on the new video, and we have to warn you, it is tough to watch.
It's hard to talk when you... Tonight, former Minneapolis cop 2 Tao's defense team arguing Tao's body cam video proves he shouldn't face charges in the killing of George Floyd.
Don't touch me.
We've seen Tao in images shot by bystanders, but this new video filed in court shows Tao's camera as he tries to corral the growing crowd onto the sidewalk.
Those hats out. That's stop him. He's breathing right now, bro. You think that's cool? You think that's cool, though, right?
The gathering public appearing shocked, concerned about the other officers restraining Floyd until he lost consciousness and later died.
You can't even look at me like a man because you're a bum, bro. He's not even resisting arrest right now, bro. Those hats out.
Some 9 minutes in,
Back off.
Tao confronting a bystander who identified herself as an off-duty firefighter and desperately wanted to help.
He's not responsive right now, bro. You're definitely a bum, bro.
Tell me what it is. Tell me what his pulse is right now.
Check the pulse.
The fact that you guys are checking his pulse and doing compressions if he needs them, you guys are on it up to that.
Tao's attorney also submitted the officer's interview with investigators.
They're saying, yeah, get off him, get off his neck, look at him.
Suggesting what?
Check on him. Yeah.
Check on him? Did you do that?
That was not my job.
Okay.
Alex joins us now. And Alex, what is next in this case in terms of actual court proceedings?
Well, Ariel, there's already a tentative trial date set for March of next year, but attorneys are all due back in court next month to tackle a motion by the prosecutor to try all 4 of the former officers at the same time in one trial. That hearing, like I said, happening next month. Ariel?
And Alex, we've seen so many videos released in recent days from the officers. Are we expecting any more videos are out there?
Yeah, there's been so many court documents and evidence that has been released, but the one video we still haven't seen just yet is Officer Derek Chauvin's body cam video. At this point, there's no indication that that's going to be released, but as so many of us know, we've seen what happened just from the bystanders video that has made the rounds on the internet. Ariel?
Alex Perez following this story from the very beginning. Thank you so much. A solemn gathering in Houston today to remember Army soldier Vanessa Guillen, her casket arriving on a horse-drawn carriage at her Houston high school where people came to pay their respects. Guillen was brutally murdered while serving at Fort Hood. Her death has prompted a call for changes in how the military handles sexual abuse and harassment claims. Her private funeral is set for tomorrow. And when we come back, the terrifying moment a bison tosses a motorcyclist after she was reportedly taking photos. And why the DOJ is accusing Yale of discrimination. But up next, the tragic killing of a 5-year-old little boy reportedly shot in cold blood while riding his bike. His neighbor, now in custody, will speak with the boy's father. Stay with us. Welcome back. We turn now to a heartbreaking and disturbing tragedy out of North Carolina. A 5-year-old boy shot dead while riding his bicycle by his family's home on Sunday. Cannon Hinnant was playing with his 2 young sisters when police say a neighbor, Darius Sessoms, walked up to the boy and shot him in the head at close range. His siblings witnessing this horrific act. Sessoms has been charged with first-degree murder. A motive has not been determined, but police say it was not random. Today, the community just held a memorial in the boy's honor. And joining us now is Cannon's father, Austin Hinnant. First of all, Austin, please allow me to express our deepest condolences to you and your family. We are so sorry for your tragic loss. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us tonight.
Thank you.
Austin, I can only imagine how difficult this is for you, for your entire family, especially Cannon's young siblings.
Yes, ma'am. It's been very tough for my 2 daughters.
This is such a horrific loss, and the suspect is someone that you know?
Yes, ma'am. We've been neighbors for 8 years.
Describe your relationship with Sessoms. Have you had any contact with him in the past?
We had just been cordial neighbors like anybody else. We'd speak when we saw one another, and he may walk over and talk to me for a few moments, vice versa. I did offer him to have dinner with me this Saturday, the day before the shooting, and he had dinner with me, but I'm not sure what led up to this event.
So you say the 2 of you did have dinner prior to this shooting?
The day before, he was in his truck or in his car, and he looked like he had a lot on his mind. And I was cooking chicken on the grill, so I invited him into my home because we had extra food. As we're supporters of God, and I just told him that God tells us to love our neighbors. So,
can you describe his personality, his demeanor, the night that you saw him?
The night that we had dinner together, his demeanor was fine. We shared a beer together on the front porch as the chicken cooked, and once it was done, him and I both went in and made a plate along with my fiance and my 3 children. My fiance sat with my 3 children at the kitchen table while me and him sat on the sofa at the coffee table.
And what was your conversation like with him?
He seemed to be paranoid that he thought a lot of people were trying to set him up. I think he may have had some dealings, and I know he had a prior record, so I don't know exactly what it was about, but I felt like he was paranoid about somebody setting him up.
Setting him up for what?
Just trying to get him caught, because like I said, he has a record. I'm not sure what his dealings were, but that's what he told me he felt about the people that he was with Friday night, the night prior to us having dinner.
Take us back to those terrifying moments. So many are just shocked that someone would kill an innocent little boy.
Oh, man. It was unreal. We started our day off by going to Wave Church in Wilson, where we've been going for the past year and a half. And we followed up with lunch at a local Mexican restaurant that we love. Went home, and we were lazy for about 2 hours as my little sister, Cannon's cousin, Jaden, had come over. And they played inside as my fiance took a nap, and I ended up dozing off on the couch for a bit myself. And around 4:45, 5 o'clock, I woke up, went to check on my fiance. She was awake. I got her up out of bed, and we moved along into the living room, and we were bombarded with the children wanting to go outside to play. They all wanted to go ride their bikes and enjoy their Sunday afternoon just like any other Sunday. And it wasn't 20 to 30 minutes later, I heard the gunshot while I was inside on my Xbox, and I flew out of my front door. And the first thing I see is my son laying on the ground, and it crossed my mind that maybe he had just fell off his bike. As I got closer to him and I just scooped him up in my arms, I realized how big of a deal it was, how horrific it was. I had to scoop my son up and hold him in my arms as blood ran down my arm. And all I could do was pray to God.
And his sisters were there to witness this whole thing. I can't even imagine. Police are, of course, investigating this incident. What are they telling you now?
I haven't heard anything from the detectives in a day or two. There's a lot of rumors going around, but about what he says, why he done it. But I know the truth, and whether he's willing to admit it or not, we'll find out when the trial comes.
No parent should ever have to bury a child. Austin, can you tell us a little bit about Cannon and how your family will remember him?
Cannon was a loving child. He loved going to church. He lit up any room that he walked into. I mean, any store that we were in, he would talk to a stranger. It didn't matter the race, or whether they were male or female, old or young. He loved everyone. And he would ask that we all come together in his name and try to unite this country, start to love one another.
Austin, thank you so much for sharing some of your time. And again, our hearts are with you and your family right now.
Thank you, ma'am.
And still to come tonight, more than 1 million barrels of oil seized allegedly on the way from Iran to Venezuela, 2 heavily sanctioned nations. And how do you teach history when it's in motion? We'll hear from teachers on how they plan to handle the pandemic in their classrooms. And with the NBA playoffs set to begin next week, a look at the success of the NBA bubble by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day, a message from Marge
I
Simpson.
usually don't get into politics, but the president's senior advisor, Jenna Ellis, just said Kamala Harris sounds like me. Lisa says she doesn't mean it as a compliment. If that's so, as an ordinary suburban housewife, I'm starting to feel a little disrespected. I teach my children not to name call Jenna. I was gonna say I'm pissed off, but I'm afraid they bleep it.
Welcome back. Professional sports have struggled to stay afloat during the pandemic, but there's been widespread praise for the NBA's handling of its season. Players sequestered on the Disney ESPN campus in Orlando for the past month. Let's take a look at the NBA bubble by the numbers. 22 teams were invited to finish out the regular season, each team playing 8 seeding teams to determine which 16 would face off in the playoffs starting next week. With an 8-0 record, the Phoenix Suns had the best run in Orlando, but with the worst record heading into the bubble, they fell just short of making the cut for the playoffs. Instead, the 8 and 9 seed teams in the Western Conference, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Portland Trail Blazers, will face off in a play-in game this weekend to determine the final playoff spot. With 61 points in one game this week, Portland star Damian Lillard has been on fire in the final stretch to boost his team's chances. But the bubble brought an end to one team's streak. For the first time in 22 seasons, the San Antonio Spurs won't advance to the playoffs after being eliminated last night. Whoever wins, fans have eaten up the NBA's restart after 4 months off. Nielsen reporting that 47 million viewers have tuned in to NBA games in the past 12 days since play resumed. I'm sure it's a welcome distraction. And we still have a lot to get to on this Friday here at Prime. The FBI lawyer who plans to plead guilty in a probe related to the Russia investigation. Plus, our conversation with the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, how that landmark deal between Israel and the UAE could reshape the region. And the new task force at the Pentagon to look at UFOs. What are they investigating? But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
After criticizing voting by mail, President Trump requested a mail-in ballot for himself. Florida election officials say First Lady Melania Trump also did.
President Trump now telling Fox News he wants to block billions of dollars from the U.S. Post Office to try and prevent Democrats from expanding mail-in voting.
Now, if we don't make a deal, that means they don't get the money. That means they can't have universal mail-in voting. They just can't have it.
Trump has repeatedly, without evidence, claimed that mail-in ballots would lead to widespread voter fraud.
The president is afraid of the American people.
President's 2020 opponent calling the move an assault on our democracy.
The CDC says there could be 200,000 coronavirus deaths in the U.S. by Labor Day. A new survey finds half of Americans know someone in the country who has tested positive for COVID-19. The Societal Experts Action Network says it's up from 41% last month. Black and Hispanic people were more likely to know someone who died from the virus.
Open school!
We want to be in school. We want to be playing sports, with the proper precautions, obviously.
One school in California ignoring state orders, opening its campus to hundreds of students.
It's just going to undo all of the potential progress that we've made in containing the virus.
Firefighters in Southern California are battling 3 large wildfires as a week-long heat wave bakes the state.
New numbers we have in now on the fire of biggest concern here in Southern California, the Lake Fire in northern LA County. It's now close to 12,000 acres. Most of that burned when it ran on Wednesday night and then stopped growing very much. But now firefighters have counted 5 buildings that were destroyed, and still they have lots of work to do.
They're all being pushed by Mother Nature's triple threat: the low humidity, the whipping winds, and of course the scorching temperatures. It's going to be another hot day today, and we're expecting temperatures above 100 degrees throughout the weekend. That is bad news for fire crews across the state. And think about this, we're only in August. California has had its most destructive and its deadliest fires in recent years in both November and December, so we still have a long way to go.
The Justice Department says Yale discriminates based on race and national origin and uses race in admissions to a greater degree than the Supreme Court allows.
A 2-year investigation found Yale rejected Asian American and white applicants based on their race. The DOJ is ordering Yale to stop using race or national origin in the admissions process for at least 1 year. The university calls the claims meritless and says it will fight the order.
A bison attack caught on camera in South Dakota's Custer State Park as shocked onlookers watch.
She's unconscious.
The 54-year-old woman was attempting to approach a bison calf Wednesday.
How close does she have to get?
When an adult bison charged.
Oh my God.
The woman lost consciousness as the bison swung her around. Its horn caught on her belt and jeans, but she escaped serious injury after her pants came off.
Oh my God, it got her.
It's not just conspiracy theorists searching for the truth out there. The Pentagon will now investigate possible UFOs. 2 U.S. officials confirm a task force will review unexplained aerial phenomena observed by the U.S. military. The Navy recently declassified videos showing pilots baffled by fast-moving, unidentified flying objects off the coast of California in 2004 and 2015. The task force will expand the review to other service branches.
Welcome back. A former FBI lawyer is expected to plead guilty after admitting he altered an email from the CIA to renew a wiretap of former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. Kevin Kleinsmith resigned last year after an internal investigation revealed his actions. This is the first charge brought by U.S. Attorney John Durham, who was tapped by the Attorney General to probe the origins of the Russia investigation. The timing of the announcement did raise eyebrows after President Trump brought it up in an interview earlier yesterday. Then later in the day, Attorney General William Barr promised an update to that investigation. Retail sales were up by 1.2% last month compared to June, but that's a smaller increase than many economists were expecting. This as some of the most popular restaurant chains in America that have been rocked by the pandemic could go under. Rebecca Jarvis has more on the retail struggle.
Big cities feeling the economic impact of the pandemic, but perhaps none more than New York City. More than 6,500 New York City businesses permanently closed since March. Tourists, 65 million a year, are now gone. The lack of traffic forcing retailers from JCPenney to Kate Spade to Neiman Marcus to shut some New York locations for good.
People were just not on the streets.
They were not walking in.
Experts say expensive rents are also to blame.
If they close in New York City, they can save on that expensive rent and reopen in other places, such as Florida or the Midwest or elsewhere in the country,
where it's much less expensive to operate. One of those companies paying top dollar, Victoria's Secret, which shells out nearly $1 million in rent every month for its flagship shop in Midtown, closing its Big Apple locations while opening in other states. The hefty bills also hitting many small businesses hard.
Business went down drastically, I would say probably 90%.
Other large cities across the country are also seeing a decline due to the pandemic. The LA metro area losing nearly 7,000 businesses and Chicago almost 3,000 since March. And a new report from S&P Global Market Intelligence predicting 6 major restaurant chains could fail if their finances were to deteriorate, including Applebee's, the Cheesecake Factory, and IHOP, due in part to capacity limitations. But when it comes to New York City, some experts are optimistic it will bounce back.
If any city can really reinvent itself, it's New York.
Our thanks to Rebecca for that. And tensions are mounting between the U.S. and Iran after the Pentagon announced the seizure of cargo on board 4 ships allegedly transporting Iranian fuel to Venezuela. Both nations are heavily sanctioned. According to a senior U.S. official, no military force was used in seizing that cargo, and the ships themselves were not confiscated, but 1.1 million barrels of petroleum are now in U.S. custody. And turning now to the landmark agreement to normalize relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE becoming only the 3rd Arab country to establish formal ties with Israel, joining Egypt and Jordan. So what does this mean for the future of the Middle East? Joining me now to provide some insight, Daniel Shapiro, former U.S. ambassador to Israel under the Obama administration. Ambassador Shapiro, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Great to be with you.
You called this deal good news, and you've said it's part of a bipartisan goal to normalize relations between Israel and Arab nations. But former Obama Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes tweeted, "This agreement enshrines what has been the emerging status quo in the region for a long time, including the total exclusion of the Palestinians, dressed up as an election-eve achievement for 2 leaders who want Trump to win." So I want to ask you, does the Trump administration deserve credit for fostering this deal? And what do you think the implications are of it happening now?
Well, certainly the Trump administration worked on it, and there's credit to be derived from that. As I said, this was a goal, or this has been a goal, of every administration going back at least 30 years, probably longer, to gradually expand the circle of Arab nations that normalize their relations with Israel. It's been supported by Republican and Democratic administrations. There's been progress during the Egyptian peace treaty and the Jordanian peace treaty. And it is true that over the last decade or so, Israel's relations with a number of Gulf states, and especially the United Arab Emirates, became closer and more developed, even while they remained unofficial and originally in the shadows, and then more recently a bit out in the open. So it wasn't as big of a leap for the United Arab Emirates to take the final step to normalize their relations with Israel. But it is a welcome step. It is good news in that it does expand the circle of nations in the region that Israel has normalized relations with. That's good for the United States, so that U.S. partners are partners with each other. That does reduce risk of conflict and create many opportunities for cooperation in business and science and technology and in security. Of course, these 2 nations share common enemies like Iran and jihadist movements. So it's definitely good news. Now, it is also important, though, that it be leveraged to re-energize progress toward a 2-state solution that will achieve Palestinian rights for a state of their own and achieve Israel's desires to be secure and retain its Jewish and democratic character for the long term. That's why it was very important that the risk that unilateral annexation by Israel in the West Bank, which was on the table, be taken off the table. And I believe it's been taken off the table for a very long period of time, was included in this agreement. And the Trump administration, or if it's next year, the Biden administration, should shelve aspects of the Trump plan, which were not really a realistic 2-state solution, and return to something that Palestinians and Israelis can both derive the outcomes they desire and deserve, which is a 2-state solution that serves both parties' needs.
As you mentioned, the UAE and Israel have been cooperating covertly for years. So you touched on this briefly, but what are the tangible impacts that we could see this agreement having on the dynamics in the Middle East?
No question that Israel and the United Arab Emirates have already been sharing intelligence and even sharing various forms of other security coordination, including some technologies, in the service of their addressing shared threats. Number one, Iran, its threat of nuclear weapons, its threat by sponsoring proxies and threatening shipping and sponsoring terrorist organizations that threaten both of those nations and others in the region. That's been ongoing, but now it can be conducted even more openly. And that's a benefit to the coalition of countries, the United States is part of it, that believes Iran poses a serious threat to regional security. But already in recent years, many Israeli companies with a range of technologies, from communications to water to energy to healthcare, particularly relevant during the time of COVID-19, have found business opportunities in the United Arab Emirates, first sort of behind the scenes, and now that can be conducted openly. And it lowers the barriers for other forms of cultural exchange, academic exchange, athletic exchanges, tourism, travel in both directions. That's something that, frankly, Israel has not fully achieved in its peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, which are relatively cold pieces between leaders that don't have much of a people-to-people aspect. This agreement to normalize relations, I believe, represents two countries that are prepared to go quite a bit further because they see real opportunities to expand their cooperation in all those fields.
The Trump administration said yesterday that they expect that other Arab nations could follow suit. And do you think this could have a domino effect? All eyes seem to be trained squarely on Saudi Arabia.
I do think it is possible that other Gulf states will follow the UAE's lead. More likely, Bahrain and Oman would be early candidates. They have certainly already had some engagements with Israeli leaders in unofficial ways, but they seem further along on the path toward normalization. Saudi Arabia would be obviously the most influential of the Saudi states. I think it's less likely that that will happen soon. There's a lot of resistance to this notion in Saudi society. There's a Saudi leadership that includes both a young, very iconoclastic crown prince, but also an older and more traditional king. And they may not be on exactly the same page on this issue. So that may not happen immediately, but that should also be part of this goal. But again, these are steps that from which Israel and the states that normalize with it can derive benefit. The United States can derive benefit. But if it's leveraged and used as a basis for further progress, first by shelving annexation and then by re-energizing diplomacy, it can actually increase the likelihood of achieving a two-state solution that serves Palestinians' needs. Palestinians may feel unhappy about this agreement today, but if it's used properly, it actually can work out for their interests as well.
Israel has agreed to temporarily halt its planned annexation of parts of the West Bank. You've praised this. Given that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is already facing increased pressure from the right-wing parties, how long do you think this can actually hold?
The threat of annexation to any remaining prospects for a two-state solution, which is critical for Israel's future, for Palestinians' future, and for American interests, was very severe. I've been a very harsh critic of the proposed annexation. It's opposed by virtually every leader of the Democratic Party in the United States, by many European nations, Arab nations, many in Israel even believe it would be very, very harmful. So it was something that should never have been put on the table. The Trump administration mistakenly included it as part of the plan that they announced in January of this year. Then there was a debate internally. Fortunately, it did not advance. And the good news is that this has been taken off the table. My understanding is that there's a very specific commitment for a significant period of time where this will not return. I hope that's permanent. Nobody can predict all scenarios in the future, but I don't see a scenario where the United Arab Emirates, having made this decision to normalize, specifically having proposed it to Israel as a choice, either you annex the West Bank or you can normalize with the United Arab Emirates, but you can't do both, is not going to find itself humiliated by Israel moving forward with annexation. Prime Minister Netanyahu may have to describe to various political supporters and members of his coalition in Israel that he still intends to try to do this in coordination with the United States. I don't see any prospect that he will be able to do that for the remainder of the Trump administration, and I see zero prospect that it would happen in a Biden administration. So for the time being, annexation is off the table. I hope it's buried. I hope we don't see it return. I hope we return instead to realistic negotiations on a two-state solution that serves both Palestinians and Israelis' needs.
And speaking of that, the Palestinian Authority has slammed this deal, saying that this is just a move that rewards Israel for occupation. So what does this mean for Palestinian relations, both with Israel and the Arab world writ large? And how could this affect any efforts to restart the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process?
Palestinians are understandably disappointed. The Arab Peace Initiative, which all Arab League members had signed on to, placed the sequence that first a two-state solution would be achieved, and then Arab states would normalize with Israel. And obviously, the UAE has chosen to act separate from that sequence, and other nations may be considering doing the same. So that may be frustrating to Palestinians. There doesn't mean that opportunities are lost. It certainly means in one case, a very big risk has been removed, the risk of annexation. But the Palestinians still have an opportunity to work with the United States. I hope it'll be in a Biden administration, and with Arab nations to re-energize, to build on this announcement as a basis for a broader circle of countries in the region that want to work together, that do want to see Israel and a state of Palestine living in peace with one another. They can't stay on the sidelines. They are going to have to get involved. Too often, the Palestinians have sat out of negotiations or walked away from negotiations, and that has, in some degree, caused some Arab states, UAE perhaps among them, to lose patience and decide they want to move forward on their interests. Doesn't mean the Palestinians are solely to blame. They have plenty of responsibility. Israel has responsibility for failed negotiations, and ultimately the United States is going to need to be the sponsor of a renewed and vigorous diplomatic effort to get back to talking about two states. So Palestinians, I'm not surprised, are feeling unhappy and betrayed by this decision today. But I hope they will look beyond the immediate feelings and see the opportunities. First, the good news of shelving annexation, and then the opportunities if they can work with Arab states and the United States on a renewed diplomatic effort toward two states.
Ambassador Shapiro, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Since schools shut down in March, the country has certainly changed. The pandemic leaving many Americans plagued by uncertainty as teachers head back to school, whether in physical classrooms or virtually. We asked how they're planning to have what may be difficult and at times uncomfortable conversations with their students who are living through history.
Alrighty, gang.
Welcome back to school.
I am definitely nervous about what remote learning is going to look like. I mean, we did it obviously at the end of the year last year, but I think expectations are a lot higher this year for teachers.
On the first day of school, we want to make sure that our students feel comfortable and getting used to being here. And we are at school during a pandemic. So our counselors have created a slideshow presentation that just kind of talks about some of the challenges they may be going through. For example, same storm, different boat. We are all in uncharted waters. Some may have enjoyed being home during the pandemic, others not so much. So we just want to make sure that we're being kind to everyone and addressing their social and emotional needs here at the middle school.
We are going to be actually on all online teaching, so remote learning, kids at home, and teachers. Some of our teachers are going to be teaching from home. Some of our teachers are going to be teaching from their own classrooms, that you don't have that face-to-face social interaction with the students, which is something that, we miss terribly. The most important thing for us as teachers right now is going to be to have the students tell us what is it that how they're feeling, what their concerns are, and are those concerns, the same as their families and everybody else involved.
Here we go. I'm going to introduce some gas particles here, right? Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. One of the reasons that virtual learning is inferior to in-class learning is that you're not able to do those sorts of hands-on things that really excite kids and get them to wrap their brains around difficult concepts. There is nothing more important to the study of science than doing science. And so the trick is, I think, to try and find as many close enough alternatives that you can find.
I know the pandemic is still out there. So as of right now, I would prefer to stay home because I think it's safer, not only for the students, but for us as well as teachers.
It's impossible to, I think, start the year this year with not addressing COVID-19. I really like to start the year by talking about the history of Chicago, the history of segregation in the city. And I start with like a map of sort of the racial demographics of each neighborhood. When some of the data came out about COVID-19, there was maps you could see on the Chicago Tribune's website. And I did think, well, this would be a really interesting, thing to teach about. But at the same time, the neighborhoods where a lot of my students are coming from are being hit pretty hard by COVID-19. How do I talk about these things while being mindful that the kids are dealing with this all through this remote and virtual learning?
The best thing we can do is be honest with our fears and our challenges that are going to come with incorporating classroom procedures about COVID into them. We're going to need to be a community that backs each other up, and we're going to need to have difficult conversations with kids. There are many kids for whom wearing masks and personal protection equipment is a political choice. It is a question of their freedom, and while a classroom is a place where we can have lots of those kinds of important discussions, it's also a place where safety needs to be our number one priority.
We have several lessons and, restorative justice, which is pretty much trying to address the issues without overwhelming them because they're still very young, teaching them that it's important to just not only have empathy, but know what is happening and why, and, not necessarily the politics of it, but the fact that there are social injustices that need to be addressed.
I know that, prior to actually learning, there will be discussions about all the pandemics and all the going on in the world. And I think, you have to open up the lines of communication and give the students a voice and let them voice their concerns. When we're face-to-face, they're more interactive, they like to participate more, and then we have to do an extra 15 minutes of just hanging out, because then that's when they really start telling me about their days and what's going on. And I'm like, I share with them too, and they're like, oh my God, I become like a real person to them when I open up and share. It's like, wow, she's not a robot, she is a real person. I think I'm going a little more face-to-face time with them.
You have to love our teachers. When we come back, the biggest blockbuster out right now, it may surprise you. Stay with us. And finally tonight, Hollywood studios are desperate to get back to normal and bring their customers back into theaters. And speaking of theaters, a film now gaining traction across Asia and Europe is the surprise blockbuster of the year. Adrian Bankert has more.
Meet this summer's biggest blockbuster, the South Korean zombie horror hit Peninsula.
Come back with the money. That's $2.5 million per head. If you come back alive.
The sequel to the film Train to Busan, released in Asia where theaters have reopened, earning about $50 million so far, in part due to a lack of competition.
Traditionally, studios release their biggest movies during summer. These movies have the potential to gross $1 billion. Peninsula is one of the few movies that still came out in theaters. And so a lot of audiences who want to see something new, this is the only opportunity they had.
But after months of studio shutdowns due to COVID-19, Hollywood is now setting the stage for a comeback. One of the first movies to roar back to life, the sequel to the 2018 smash hit Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. The new movie Jurassic World: Dominion stars fan favorites Jeff Goldblum, Laura Dern, Chris Pratt, and Bryce Dallas Howard. Kicking off production in London, complete with a 107-page safety manual, social distancing measures, antiviral fogging, 150 hand sanitizer stations, and regular COVID testing.
They rented out a hotel that everyone is staying at. They are testing people 3 times a week for COVID, and if anyone displays any symptoms, they're isolating them. And so they're taking pretty extreme and expensive measures to make sure that everyone feels safe.
All as theaters in the U.S. get ready to welcome back moviegoers, AMC is opening more than 100 theaters on August 20th with enhanced cleaning procedures, reduced capacity, and tickets for just 15 cents, the price they were 100 years ago.
Our thanks to Adrian for that. And before we go tonight, the image of the day. Is this the future of live music concerts? Some 2,500 fans reportedly gathered at an outdoor venue earlier this week for the UK's first socially distanced concert. With coronavirus taking away so many weekend activities, here's hoping innovation brings back many of the things we love. That's our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Ariel Reshef in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks for streaming with us. Have a great night.